Hi, Dr. Smith. This is Ann Cherigino talking a little bit about my presentation and the lesson and assessment that I came up with for the copyright assignment. So, knowing that I have to use the Assure model, the A part of the Assure model asks us to analyze learners. A little bit of background on the assignment before I get to the analyze learners part. The assignment itself, after the presentation that I did, the lecture to the students, informing them about the copyright laws, I had them as their assignment to come up with, to create a checklist of criteria for using when they do their project with their classroom teacher. So as a way for them to self-check and be able to see what it is that they need to be aware of for items that they may come across in their research that they want to incorporate into their project, so that way they can tell I am using this in the proper way or I'm breaking copyright laws and guidelines and I need to somehow fix it. So that's what their assignment is. And then the rubric goes through and evaluates all of that. So that's just sort of a brief overview of what that assignment would look like for them. For the learners themselves, though, since we have to analyze learners first, ninth grade students chose to sort of pick a demographic that's similar to what we have around here where I am here in Oregon. Suburban high school, mostly white, with approximately a third of the students of either Vietnamese or Filipino descent. In the area where I live, there's a very high population of both of those heritages, so I chose to stick with that. For strengths, students who are average writers and readers, but with a few outliers who are a little bit above or below average. The challenges, I think, with freshmen in particular is that they don't have a ton of background in doing proper research. They're new to high school. It's not something that they did a lot of at the middle school level, or if it did, it was very rudimentary and people didn't necessarily take the time needed to explain copyright to them. So while they're very tech savvy and while they're good at finding things on the internet or doing research or looking things up, they're not really good about knowing whether they're doing it ethically or not. So that's definitely the challenge. And also makes it that it's a very real worry that they would break copyright law and not know that they were doing it. For the students, I would give them a pre-test on copyright rules to see what they knew and what they didn't know, as a background to moving forward with the presentation as well as with them starting their assignments. For S in the Assure model, we state standards and objectives. I did the objectives first. So the students will need to define copyright rules and laws. Students will analyze their sources to determine compliance with copyright law. So they'll actually do that when they're utilizing the checklist that they make. And then they will create the copyright self-check for use in their presentations and in their project that they're doing with their classroom teacher. The two standards that I saw that really stood out were 1.2.c, which is students demonstrate an understanding of and respect for the rights and obligations of using and sharing intellectual property. I think that one's a given. I think the biggest part about copyright is making sure that you give credit to people who create things. So I definitely saw that one there. And then also 1.7.c, which is students contribute constructively to project teams, assuming various roles and responsibilities to work effectively toward a common goal. In my way of thinking of how they'll go about creating the self-check, it's not something that they'll do individually. That checklist that they'll create would be done in groups of 2 or 3 as a way for them to be able to collaborate and work together and talk through their understanding of copyright rules. I think this will also help students who maybe aren't strong in understanding it or who aren't strong in communication being with other students who maybe have a stronger understanding of those things. I would like to use the pre-test as a way to say, okay, these students have a background in copyright and maybe understand it a little bit, and then intentionally use those students spread out throughout the other groups. So then we have a group that maybe is mixed of those who have some experience of copyright law and those who do not. The second S for the Assure model is to select strategies and resources. The first is the lecture explaining copyright rules and laws. The second, guided notes for student use during the lecture. So during the lecture, I would have a sheet for the students, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the student lecture, a sheet for the students to complete and fill out that would help guide them through the different terminology and the kinds of things they need to pay attention to. And then with a summary at the end where they, in their own words, explain what they see copyright rules and laws to be. Online videos for reteaching if necessary. So this allows for a lot of different learning styles. So you have the audio of me talking. You also have the visual of the slides that I use in their presentation. Multimedia, I have online videos that they can use for reteaching. And since both the lecture is recorded and they have online videos they can use for reteaching, for those students who maybe are struggling or who maybe need to hear the information more than once, there's ample opportunity for them to go back and review or hear it presented in a different way and still be able to receive all of that information. For the U of the Assure model, we utilize resources. So thinking about what I would need to prepare and how I would get it all ready. The resources are the recorded lecture, the guided notes that would go along with that, the requirements for the group project, the rubric as well, and then videos ready for reteaching if necessary. The actual environment itself, I would want in a lecture style, at least to start, so they could focus on me. But if that is not possible, then I could move them to group seating or have them in group seating already. I know sometimes in libraries, tables are more the common type of furniture than, say, straight chairs in a line. So it could be that they view my lecture to them by sharing a laptop or a Chromebook or something like that, and then able to start into their group project right after that. For the learners, I would prepare them by doing the pretest, and then the explanation of the real world applications and the implications of copyright law, I think, comes within those first few minutes of the video as well. R require learner participation. So students will work as a group to put together a self-check of criteria for students to use when they do their research projects. As we know, the best way to have someone show that they understand something is to explain it to somebody else. So since they're creating a tool that they and the other people in their group would have to be able to use, they're showing that they understand copyright law by being able to create the criterion that they would use for themselves. It'll determine for the types of sources that they find whether or not they're following copyright law. And then finally, we have E, the evaluate and revise. So the rubric that they would use for their assessment is to focus on the following criterion: defining copyright law, determining criteria for evaluating materials, evaluating different types of media and examples to see if they fall under copyright infringement or not, or whether they're acceptable use, and then self-reflection of the materials they choose to use in their presentations. So all of those are the elements in the rubric, grading them for all of those things. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this explanation of how the lecture and lesson and assignment that I came up with follows the Assure model.